Hello. Two important events happened this week. One was a speech by Vladimir Vladimirovich Putin to the people. The other was the European Union summit, which was supposed to legalize the theft of Russian money. But naturally, we'll start with the summit. It actually took place earlier. The summit demonstrated clearly and distinctly, and absolutely convincingly, that the old system, let's call it that for now, the Bretton Woods dollar-based system, in this particular case, the part that concerns the Eurozone, no longer works. In other words, they failed to seize Russian money. Although, to be fair, there is a small detail. They froze those assets and are still trying to do something with them, but in this case, it doesn't play any fundamental role. The key fundamental point is this: they don't know what to do by it. And as Andrei Petrovich Devyatov says, this is the most important intelligence indicator. In other words, they have no idea how to solve it. These are issues that, in theory, should have been resolved with a snap of the fingers. After all, it's their money, not ours. From the standpoint of assets, these are their debt obligations in money in euros and so on. That wouldn't have happened. So what does this mean in reality? It means that the Bretton Woods dollar-based model, which dominated the world with all its institutions, numerous as they are, and laws, has fallen apart. It's gone now. Let's note that Donald Trump himself understands this perfectly well, which is why he proposed his new political concepts that we've already discussed. And here's where it gets really interesting. The thing is, if we look at the strategic logic of the United States of America and energy superpower, its economic strategy, from the perspective of the basic model that existed before, we can see that being an energy superpower is, of course, a step back from the position of the dollar empire, because the dollar empire means the United States of America is a superpower in everything. In technology, in energy. In fact, since the early 70s, the dollar has been a petrodollar. In military terms, in logistics, and so on, and so forth. Even if that's not entirely true, at the very least, that's how it's portrayed. Today, this means a retreat to the level of merely being an energy superpower, but this still preserves the same logic. What about the United States of America? Doubt it. And if we look at what they said there, what did Trump say in this idea? C5, it's the idea of currency zones. As you can imagine, in every currency zone, there's a country that accordingly dominates. And in the currency, because it is the issuer of that currency. And accordingly in everything else as well. In other words, there are some strong internal contradictions here. That is, in reality, it's impossible to implement the concept of an energy superpower in the way it's being presented. Because the old institutions are collapsing, as we can see, for example, in the European Union, and accordingly. There are no new ones. At the same time, Trump is proposing some new institutions, like the same C5, but these institutions also don't fit. From this, it immediately follows that Trump actually has a plan B, which is similar, well, at least in the initial stage, to the energy superpower idea, but still, it's a slightly different plan. And it's this very plan B that will actually be implemented. At the same time, this plan B is, at least with one counterpart, already agreed upon. That counterpart is Russia and Putin. By the way, let me point out, yes, Trump actually proposed this neutral zone, right? Italy, Austria, Hungary, the unnamed Czech Republic or Slovakia, or both the Czech Republic and Slovakia, and finally, Poland. Now, let's take a look at what Putin is saying. He says that if the political leaders of Europe were friends with Russia, we would have such an economic center that would be stronger than anyone else. But we all understand that Putin knows very well who the political leaders of the EU countries are. In fact, he has repeatedly said out loud what he thinks of them. At the very least, these are people with whom it's pointless to even talk. They're just executors. And not even good executors, but that's another matter. So, theoretically, who should Putin have been addressing? Either he should have been addressing the people who are actually behind these so-called political figures of the European Union, and he's telling them, guys, come on, stop fooling around, let's get serious. But that's out of the question for a simple reason. The elites are organized along clan and tribal lines. Putin isn't part of their clan. They'll never accept him. And it's not just about Putin. It's the same for other people, too. That's why they won't agree to any deals. How many times has Russia tried to reach an agreement with Western Europe at the elite level? What came out of it? Every single time, nothing came of it. They managed to reach agreements on a local political level, but never at the elite level. But that's understandable. They're different. By the way, there are elites that are compatible. You know, like the Ruhr kids and the Golden Horde elite got along perfectly well. Really, they got along great. They merged to the point of being indistinguishable. But here, it doesn't work out. And then, so who is Putin saying this to? He's saying this to those political leaders of certain European countries who have managed to maintain some independence. That is Italy, Austria, Hungary, Slovakia, and actually Poland. There are elites in Poland who understand this. He's telling them, guys, leave the European Union and we'll make a deal. And Trump isn't against it either. That's precisely who Vladimir Putin's crucial message is primarily aimed at. And for this very significant reason, what we are currently observing and experiencing now is an extraordinarily complex, deeply intricate, and indeed a very quiet, almost imperceptible process, a nuanced unfolding of events. One that hasn't been described publicly at all, during which they're actually talking about this very Plan B. By the way, let me point out, Trump still hasn't gotten involved in Venezuela. He just seized a tanker. Who's tanker? Chinese? In other words, with China. Trump's clashes are ongoing and will continue as long as the unified dollar system exists. Moreover, there will be more clashes down the line because Trump and China, well, the US and China, have a very serious issue, a front line in the Pacific Ocean. Well, I mean, the Philippines are American, but what about Indonesia, Malaysia, Singapore, and a few others? And Japan, after all. Well, I personally think Japan is ours, but okay, we'll see about that. Here's the picture that what's happening now is very much behind the scenes. It's very quiet. Well, except maybe for China and the United States butting heads. And Trump has already written off Europe, because from the perspective of this new concept of an energy superpower within the dollar zone. Western Europe is a dollar zone where Trump will sell oil and gas as an energy superpower. And here are Italy, Austria, Hungary, Slovakia. And perhaps Poland will receive gas from Russia and oil on completely different terms. But at the same time, they will be politically neutral. There are no Warsaw Pacts or NATO. This is how the situation works out, theoretically. I'm by no means insisting that this is exactly how things will turn out, especially since if Plan A, well, it's already been announced, right? The energy superpower, back and forth, but Plan B of the United States, and apparently partly Russia, maybe even fully, has not been announced. And for this reason, Putin has been very careful to stay silent on this topic. Exactly for this reason, because it's still too early. But when the time is right, we'll see it all. And for some people, it will be quite a revelation. So actually, I'd like to wrap up here. I'll just point out two things. First, Let me remind you that on February 21st, we will most likely have a big conference, the anniversary event of the Khazin Foundation. An announcement will be coming in the next few days. Sign up. It's going to be very interesting because we'll be discussing exactly these, the changes that are happening both in the world and in business, because the changes in business will also be very significant. In the coming days, maybe even as soon as today, you'll be able to gift subscriptions to your friends and loved ones for Khazin Foundation products, and accordingly, the Telegram channel. And so we are already moving on to next week to a completely new schedule with a focus on the website. I really hope I'll be able to set up a full-fledged forum there. Of course, there will be major challenges, but still. So I encourage everyone to keep an eye out for announcements. First and foremost, in my public Telegram channel, since right now it's the main one, it's the main window to the world, and of course the website as well. Thank you. Thank you for your attention.